Hello again. I'm Braddock Supervisor John Cook. Welcome back to Braddock Neighborhood News, the program I am using to provide you with information on issues facing our community and ideas on how we can strengthen our neighborhoods. With school in its first month, we are reminded of an area of concern that has come to the forefront recently: bullying and bullying prevention. Joining me today are Mary Ann Panarelli, the Director of Intervention and Prevention Services for Fairfax County Public Schools, and Kristen Brennan, Prevention Coordination Specialist with Fairfax County Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. Together, we hope to shed some light on this serious problem and identify ways it can be addressed. Mary Ann and Kristen, thanks so much for being on the show.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Happy to be here.
And I really appreciate all the work you guys are doing, both individually in your departments, but also together and with the community. And we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff. But why don't we just start off with the basic question of what bullying is, because it's a term now that people are starting to focus on it. It gets thrown around a lot. And it means some things and not others. So, Mary Ann, you want to kick that off for us?
Sure. One of the important parts of our efforts for bullying prevention in the school system is to try to come to a common definition. So we've been expressing that common definition in a lot of different places where the kids will see it. Basically, bullying is when someone or a group of people intentionally set out to harm someone. Usually there's a difference in power between the person who is doing the bullying and the person who is the target of that. That could be a social power or a physical power. And typically the bullying will be repeated over time or be so severe that it is something that needs to be intervened with immediately. What it isn't, though, is common horseplay, teasing. An equal fight between two kids would not be considered bullying. So it is not the common interactions between two kids. It's really intended to harm.
I think, you mentioned the power differential, and that concept, because we see it in the workplace too, that concept of one person who's using an advantage they have. Right. It might be a stature or physical or age, what have you, but they're using that statute to sort of being able to push that over on someone. And that's really, I think, part of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Children have to learn how to deal with conflict in a lot of different ways. And so when they're relatively equal, or one person is the person one day giving someone a hard time and the next day it's the other person giving them a hard time, that's not bullying. That's just part of learning how to interact with another person as you're growing up. But the bullying is this intentional use of either, again, physical power or some sort of social power that you may have over another person.
Right. And Kristen, you're working on this in neighborhood and community services as well. And talk a little bit about that angle and how that brings you to bullying prevention.
Right. So I work on bullying prevention as part of the Neighborhood and Community Services Prevention Unit. And we're focusing on all different kinds of topics that are related to preventing risky behaviors and violence among youth and in the community. So in addition to bullying prevention, it's things like suicide prevention and other types of violence, substance abuse, all of the things that kids can become involved in. So all of those things are related and sort of work together. With bullying prevention, we really work doing some of the same kinds of things that the school system does in terms of working with the kids in the community centers and the teen centers and other community programs that we have to build their resilience, to understand what bullying is, to work on their empathy and their interpersonal skills, and get to the root of why they might be exhibiting some of those behaviors in the first place.
And that's a good question, is how kids come about to this. And because it's not just kind of kids being kids, but it might have a root in some issue or problem. And then there are also cultural underpinnings and different cultures and people coming from different backgrounds, and you see that in schools.
We do. What we know from our youth survey data is that almost half of the students report that they bullied someone else, as well as about half of the kids reporting that they've been bullied at some point. So we know that it's not as if one group of kids are the bullies and the other group of kids are the ones being targeted, but that one child could play both roles in different circumstances. So part of our approach to working with them is, if an incident occurs, to make sure that we are referring to the counselor, to the school psychologist, to the school social worker, both students, so that we can get to the bottom of what was going on and also uncover if there was anything else in the background that didn't have anything to do between the conflict of the two of them, but perhaps was something that led to this circumstance to begin with. So a lot of our work is focused on trying to understand, were you just frustrated today, or was there something a little bit more underpinning? In terms of the kind of racial, cultural things, we are certainly an extremely diverse school system. And like, again, any group of people, it takes a certain amount of work and effort on everyone's part to learn to interact together and to understand where the other person may be coming from. So again, sometimes we will have something reported as bullying, and then when we talk to the kids, it was a misunderstanding because of a cultural difference between the two kids, and that helps us, as Kristen was saying, help the students develop some empathy about what the other person was thinking and why would they have reacted that way.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that concept of bullying being something over time. So it's not just somebody pops off, because we all do that, adults do that too. But it's the repetition of behavior over a time period that sort of takes it out of the realm of just bad behavior or you did something that maybe you shouldn't have done, to something that's a little more important to deal with.
Right, absolutely. Most situations we are looking at a repetition, and one of the messages that we've had to get to students is that if they've told a teacher and the teacher has responded and then the situation happens again, it's very important to bring it forward a second time, because the teacher may think it was a one-time thing and they've dealt with it in the moment and they've told everybody, you know, whatever the consequences were, to settle down. We wouldn't respond as if it were bullying unless it was apparent that it was something that was happening over and over. Sometimes, unfortunately, a student will say, well, I told the adult nothing happened, it didn't change. So one of our messages is, you know, you need to come back and seek again and say, it's still going on. Don't let it drop at that point if it's something that's happening repeatedly. Occasionally there's something that's so severe and planned and intended to harm from the beginning that we would also call that bullying and would respond to it as such.
Now let me just sort of play devil's advocate and say, you know, Kristen, why are we concerned with this? People are people, somebody acts badly, learn to deal with it, there are remedies in other places. But we know that bullying's gotten a lot of attention the last several years. Talk a little bit about why that attention is important and why it does matter and why we're doing this.
Well, as a matter of fact, as the research continues, we know that exposure to violence, or what we might call adverse childhood experiences, can have lasting and permanent effects on people. There are a variety of things that are considered adverse childhood experiences, from abuse, sexual abuse, loss of a parent, and things like that. But exposure to violence is one of those things also. And particularly that feeling of helplessness and hopelessness that a child who's exposed to bullying on a repeated basis experiences can be very damaging. And it's also, of course, very unhealthy for the child who is perpetrating it, because they are not interacting in a healthy manner. They're not going to have the kind of positive social relationships that we would want them to have. So it's important for both of the parties involved to respond to it.
And it's a level of seriousness issue too, I guess.
Absolutely.
Because whereas friends coming and going or friendships breaking up might be and are common lifetime things that we all, you know, have to learn to live with, and we start to learn with that when we're kids. But a loss of a parent or something like that is sometimes does require some sort of medical attention, counseling attention, and that's the same difference with bullying, right? It's out of the realm of the everyday experiences that's part of life, and it's something that she said could have a lasting psychological effect.
We try to ground it in overall, as a community, we have responsibilities to each other. So we don't talk about bullying sort of in isolation, but instead as part of developing good relationships, of helping someone when you see someone in distress. One of the interesting things in the bullying research that has been a shift is, for a long time, a lot of the anti-bullying campaigns focused on standing up to the bully, reporting the bully, etc.
Labeling.
What we have found, labeling someone as a bully.
Yeah.
What we have found is you'll hear both of us referring to the student who is engaging in the bullying behavior, as opposed to that this person is a bully. Because, as I said, people tend to have both characteristics, and depending on the situation, they could take one role or the other. We stress a lot the important impact of the witness of a bullying situation and what they might do. But one of the things that is coming out in the more recent research, and which we certainly see in the schools, is that students will respond much more favorably and much more actively if they are invited to report to an adult the name of someone who is being bullied, as opposed to the name of the person who is doing the action. Because they see it as part of the overall seeking help for somebody that you see is in trouble. And we also know that your resilience, your ability to deal with these various lifetime adversities that you're going to encounter over the course of your life, there are certain things that build up your ability to do that. And one of them is seeking out and caring for others, taking an action to take care of each other. And so a lot of our conversations starting in kindergarten, when we're talking to children about, we start introducing the word bullying in second grade, but starting in kindergarten, we're talking about what does it look like to be a good friend? How do you help somebody? How do you notice that they need your help? So in our approach to bullying prevention and the response to bullying, we're trying to weave that message in with the rest of the messages that children are getting.
I think that's interesting that you're, as I hear, you're really talking about kind of three groupings of people, and people can cross-pollinate, so to speak.
Yes.
But, you know, the victim of the bullying, the person doing the bullying, and the witness. And how, what I'm hearing is you're really trying to talk about whichever group someone is in a circumstance, giving them the skills and the training of how to appropriately deal with that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of the things that we know, again, from the research is that to be a witness, you may be a witness who is egging the situation on and saying, yeah, go get him. You may be a witness who is sort of neutral to the situation. You just stumbled across it. You may be a witness who sort of allies with the person who is being targeted, but maybe you're afraid to say something. You don't want to get in trouble yourself. You don't want to, face some sort of retaliation. We talk to the kids about moving. Maybe you can't do it all in one step to the point where you're ready to say, this has to stop. Maybe you move one step at a time and you're not egging the kid on. And then maybe another situation, you're saying, come on, let's leave. One of the messages we tried to get to the kids is how powerful it can be after a situation has occurred, even if you said nothing, to say to the person who was the target, I didn't agree with that. I didn't think what he was doing was right. Don't think everybody is laughing at you. They're not. Because one of the problems with bullying is that it makes you feel isolated. So if somebody online is seeing somebody being bothered and they can text that person and say, get off. These people are fools. Don't listen to them. That can be a powerful intervention.
I think that's interesting that we're talking about some life skills as you were describing the witnesses to bullying, and we do a lot of community work in talking about crime prevention and hey, you can't just, you see something happening outside, don't close your windows, shutter yourself up, but report it, call the police. And that's part of what we're trying to do here is learn, and there's no perfect bright line, the nosy neighbor versus the engaged citizen who says, hey, I see something that's wrong, I'm going to report it. And so we want to start that teaching early on, and I know NCS does a lot. That's, Kristen, you're really in that. That's why your office is dealing with so many of these interrelated issues, because below it all is that concept of how do we kind of train ourselves on when to be engaged and when is it not your business to be engaged.
Yep, we're really trying to work to develop the interpersonal skills and sort of the self-awareness in kids. And we are now offering a trauma awareness training for people who work directly with kids in community-based settings. And that allows them to recognize when there are behaviors that kids are exhibiting that might be as a result of trauma or those adverse childhood experiences I was talking about, recognizing the behaviors that could be a result of that, and then dealing with them in the most effective way possible, as opposed to, I know as a parent, sometimes your reaction to some of the aggressive behaviors or rude behaviors in teens can be just a very, you mentioned earlier, popping off. It can be really difficult not to do that. But in our training, we're really trying to help people work with kids where they are, understand some of the behaviors and what's the root of some of those behaviors, and to reduce escalating them. Right. There are so many instances where kids are really triggered and just hot and angry. And when we respond in the same way, we create a situation where it's escalating, and that's what often happens in bullying situations. Mm-hmm. There's this imbalance of power. There's a perceived disrespect, absolutely. And that can so often just send a situation spiraling out of control. Mm-hmm. So we really want to give kids the tools to recognize that those kinds of things are happening, understand what their reactions mean, why they behave the way they do, and to do better.
I think it's fascinating, this concept of kids, and it can be adults too, but where you can be the victim of bullying and be the one engaged in bullying, obviously different circumstances, but right. But what does that tell us? And how do you talk to that person when you're talking to them about sort of both sides of behavior?
Part of it is, in fact, to have the person give you an example of a situation in which they felt like somebody who had more power was taking advantage of them in some way. And being youth, they tend to point to adults as the people who do that to them, whether it's an older brother, a parent, a teacher, someone who, in their view has stepped over a line. We try to go back to, how did that make you feel? How did you respond? We try to turn the conversation when we're talking to the youth about bullying to what harm was done and who's responsible for repairing that harm. How can we repair the harm so we can get back to being part of a community, so that I don't have to be afraid that you might retaliate. You don't have to be afraid I'm going to tell, that we can get back together in some ways. And we've had some really powerful conversations with kids and their parents. We prepare the parents, prepare the kids, and then have a very structured form of a conversation where the students are able to tell each other what they were feeling, what they were experiencing. And we've had some just very powerful situations where you could see the student actually learning from the situation. And in our follow-up with those students, we've had very few that have resulted in any kind of a repeat of the situation.
Really get deeper, beyond this sort of, okay, somebody did something bad to you, okay, you're the victim today, and you need to be punished, you did something wrong, and then dropping it, but kind of getting underneath it and dealing with that.
Very few of us respond to a punishment as a, yes, you were right, I was all in the wrong. And so
we're only that easy. Yes.
In fact, getting to a point where we can say, maybe I did have a piece of this. And not all the time, certainly there are some very severe situations where, a student is just a target for no good reason. But in many situations, especially we find in the middle school years, which is when the incidence of bullying peaks.
Tough years.
Students who have been friends, they've been friends forever, and now they are in a new social network, and somebody is making fun of somebody else or telling other people, well, you don't want to be with her because, or that kind of exclusionary kind of bullying, or again, that witness who kind of gets pulled in because some group that they're now trying to be part of is doing something, and this has been their friend. So it's not that they're targeting people at random. And because there usually, very often at least, has been an underlying friendship or association before, sometimes you can bring them back to they know each other at a deeper level.
Yeah, peer pressure in both regards can be difficult on those things.
Absolutely.
Kristen, and I'm going to kind of jump topics because you mentioned something before, and I wanted to make sure we got back to it. We're talking about online and cyberbullying, and as parents, many of us are woefully underinformed on what our kids do online, and there's a lot going on. So let's talk a little bit about online bullying and what that is and how it manifests itself.
Well, there are more venues for online bullying than we could ever discuss, and they're exponentially multiplying all the time. I think the most important thing, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure you'll have some things to add, Marianne, is parents really have to get over the idea of that they're infringing on their child's privacy by monitoring what they're doing online, especially when they're in middle school age. There are national guidelines. Common Sense Media has good guidelines for what's appropriate internet contact by age, and a variety of different organizations have some guidelines out, and they're all fairly consistent. But there really are limits to how much exposure kids should have and what type of exposure they should have to the internet. And that's not just about cyberbullying, it's about safety. It's about people who would prey on kids on the internet. And parents, it's our responsibility to understand what's appropriate, what's developmentally appropriate for our kids online.
Well, and a lot of, I think one reason why the cyberbullying can be so destructive is you've got all these kids and they're all chatting and doing all that stuff, and so when this type of conversation comes into that, somebody says something about somebody else and immediately 100 other kids have seen it.
Right.
And so it's kind of like being bullied in the physical sense, parents tend to think of, right, in front of 100 of your classmates.
Right.
Where we think back, we think of the old bully who stole your lunch money and would take you behind the school, and and nobody would see it. Well, online, everybody's seeing it, and they're seeing it almost immediately.
There's both that element of it, and I do think there's been some great TED Talks on adults and the Twitter feeds and how people can bring down a person for making one comment, and all of a sudden that person's livelihood and 20 years of work is destroyed because now it's retweeted and millions of people are adding their opinions about what that person said and taking it out of context, etc. So there's the broad span that the internet brings. It's also that it comes right into your house. If you were bullied behind the school or in the locker room or all those other places, you could go home and be safe. If you are at home, and as many, if I had one thing that I would encourage parents to do, it would be to take away the phones at bedtime. I know one person who has all of the chargers in her room, and so the kids have to turn over their phones to get charged overnight. Because otherwise, the kids they'll sleep with them on the pillow next to them, and it's vibrating every time a message comes in. And so if you have a kid that's being bullied, it's just coming in 2 a.m. It's just continually. You don't have any space in which to be safe and get away from it. And so, of course, it seems like everybody is doing it to you.
Right. That's a good point. That there's no safe spot, so we have to remember that. We've only got a little bit of time left. I wanted to talk about Bullying Prevention Month, and you're both working on that. So, Kristen, tell us a little bit about what that is, and we got about a minute to talk about what's going on.
Well, it's just our national collective way of getting the word out, helping people to understand all the things that we've been talking about today, and hopefully to reduce the amount of bullying that's going on. We have all kinds of activities that happen across the school system, and you want to talk about some of those?
Well, we've been trying more and more to involve the students in activities that they generate. So I know of a school that is working on tweeting out positive messages and tweeting out messages about how you can help each other. So giving it to the students and letting the students plan activities has really proved to be very effective.
So there's a lot going on. Parents need to get engaged here. Many are. Help our kids out, and remember as parents that this can be an issue for us too in our workplaces and in our communities. There's a lot more we could talk about, but we're out of time. And I want to thank Mary Ann and Kristen for joining me today. Bullying in our schools and neighborhoods can take a huge emotional and physical toll on its victims, and we need to recognize the fact that it can be stopped. If you'd like more information, visit the federal and Fairfax County prevention websites highlighted below. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Braddock Neighborhood News. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or other needs, please contact my office at 703-425-9300 or email braddock@fairfaxcounty.gov. Tune in next month for another edition, and please remember to look for ways to volunteer. Your community needs you. Great. Does it belong? Good job.